But I decided that, in fact, I was going to have to go back yet once more because there were still some problems which I hadn't been able to sort out. And got to the departure lounge in Tripoli airport, and I was waiting for to board the aircraft. I was waiting for the boarding lights. It was about 20 minutes before takeoff time. And a man came up to me and showed his identity thing and asked me for my passport, and he looked at it and put it in his pocket. And he said, "Come with me." So I said, "Oh, wait a minute, what's all this about?" And he said, "There's trouble with your baggage." So I said, well, I knew that there had been a bit of a problem with my baggage going in, but that was entirely of their making. It wasn't anything to do with me. And I said, "Look, if you've got a problem, just put the baggage on the aeroplane and I'll sort it out when I get to London." "No, this will only take a minute," he said. You'll get the plane, don't worry." So we got in a lift and he pressed the button and the lift started to go up. And I said, "Why are we going up? The baggage is down below." And he didn't say anything. And we went up a floor, and as the doors opened and I stepped out, about half a dozen men jumped on me.
What did they do to you?
Put me in a half Nelson and marched me. It was actually the kitchens. We were now in the kitchens of the restaurant of the airport, and which were empty. There was nobody working there because the restaurant was closed. Marched me through the kitchens, through the empty restaurant, and down a corridor until we reached another lift, which took me down to the ground floor, and it was on an outside wall, and there was a Range Rover waiting just outside. They bundled me into the Range Rover, pushed me to the floor, rifled through my pockets, taking away everything that I got, and drove off.
What's going through your mind while this is going on?
What the hell is going on, And, of course, I was aware that things like this happened in these countries, but I gathered, I assumed at the time that, well, I'd be able to sort it out.
They physically hurt you?
Well, they put a half Nelson on me, so, I mean, it was no good trying to struggle. And anyway, they got about half a dozen big beefy guys. Funnily enough, one of them was the guy who had, I told you the first time I went there, I was put back on the next aircraft, and it was the same guy. And I'd been told after that first thing that he'd been in big trouble because of the way he'd handled me, and he was no longer there. Well, he certainly was. Eventually he got back to Tripoli airport.
So once they'd bundled you into the car...
Yeah, they drove me off, and I was blindfolded, so I don't know where I went. It was going, and I was pushed on the... Somebody was sitting on me. I was at the back of the Range Rover and on the floor, and somebody sitting on top of me, so I couldn't get up. And I was taken into a building and guided around and so on until eventually I was told to sit down, and I sat down in quite a comfortable seat. And so I started to lift this blindfold, but there was a restraining hand stopped me, and I had to wait about 2 or 3 hours. And obviously my plane had gone, I'd missed that. And eventually a man came in and started asking me questions, and I said, "Look, am I under arrest?" He said, "Of course you're under arrest." I said, "Well, why didn't your people tell me so instead of grabbing me like that? Was that necessary?" "Oh, I'm sorry that they did that. They should have done so," he said, "but I've realised afterwards that I wasn't the first one to have been taken like this. This was a routine that they got off pat." Because later I met somebody, a Turkish man, and he'd had exactly the same experience happen to him.
Did they explain to you why they'd taken you?
Well, only very roughly, and I said to them, well, have you got somewhere, any accommodation for me for tonight, you know, because I'm booked out of my hotel and so on. Oh yes, we'll accommodate you. They said, don't worry about that, we've got accommodation for you. And they drove me off again somewhere. And I was in a little tiny cell that measured about 2 metres by just over 1 metre wide, so it was just enough space to lie down. And in the morning I had another interrogation, and I had several interrogations over the next few days.
What were they interrogating you over?
Well, it was incredible. I mean, they were asking me what I was doing, and asking me some questions which were technical, but they didn't know what to ask. And so, I mean, a lot of the questions they were asking were absolutely stupid, because they were getting themselves involved in technicalities of radars, and they didn't know the first thing about radars. So you can imagine what it was like. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. And during this time, I had 2 mock executions for firing squad.
And what happens exactly?
Well, they took me out. This was before the interrogation. Now, Terry Waite, he had something similar, I think, but he had his mock execution after he was interrogated. In my case, they did it beforehand, because I think they're trying to put the frighteners on you so that when you're interrogated, you're going to say whatever they want.
So what do they do? Do they take you suddenly to a courtyard, or?
Yeah, I was taken. A bunch of soldiers came in. They'd all got Kalashnikovs, blindfolded, and taken out to my handcuffed behind my back, taken out to a bit of rough ground, and told to stand there. And you think, this is it, you know. I'm going to be shot. You don't have about 10 soldiers with Kalashnikovs coming and taking you away and leading you out to what is evidently rough ground, because you can feel it. You can't see anything, but it was a bit of rough ground, and you're told to turn around and face them. And I thought, well, this is it. And they did that on 2 occasions, actually.
And on both those occasions, a bizarre question, but what's going through your mind? Are you numb, or are you resigned? Or?
Well, yeah, I was thinking such things as well. If they're going to bump me off, I mean, I was thinking about my wife. I thought, what on earth is she going to do? You know, I mean, the poor thing is going to be stuck on her own. After all, although she lived a long time in England, she wasn't English, and she didn't have any relatives other than my relatives. She had none of her own people to turn to. So that was the sort of thing that was going through my mind. But, yeah, it's...
And what happens then? Do they just not fire, or what happens?
Yeah, eventually they didn't fire, and somebody came forward and they took me off and bundled me in another vehicle, and I got taken away for interrogating. And there was a whole gaggle of them interrogating me, but it's all blindfolded. You can't see what's going on. And during the interrogation, again, they were saying that if I didn't answer up, that they'd shoot me. And because you're blindfolded, you don't know whether they're just joking or if they really have got. I mean, you don't know if they're going to shoot you or not. You just hope that they're bluffing.
And apart from physical,
but you don't know if they're bluffing.
Apart from psychological torture, was there any physical torture?
No, not really. No, it was psychological. They did torture other prisoners, but I wasn't.
Why?
Why do they torture other prisoners?
Why did they not torture you?
I think they were under orders not to. Whoever had given them this order, that because, of course, there was the whole reason why they had actually taken me. The real reason why they had taken me was because we have to realise that Gaddafi's got a lot of enemies, political enemies, and he either has them shot out of hand or he has them put in prison for the rest of their lives, and the rest of them, they escape to other countries, and some of them had come to this country. Now, some of them had gone up to Manchester, and as a little group, they used to plot and scheme and meet anyway in a restaurant in Manchester. And Gaddafi, he sends hit squads after them. And he'd sent his little bunch of assassins, and they discovered these people up in Manchester. And so they put a bomb under a table in this restaurant, and the bomb went off and killed everybody, not only the people that they wanted killed, but everybody else. But the British police caught them, and they were put on trial, and they got very, very long prison sentences. And I heard that the judge had said that they shouldn't be considered for parole for at least 25 years, so they were in for a long stretch, and Gaddafi wanted them back. Now, the first thing he did was to arrange for 4 Brits, which didn't include me, 4 other Brits, to be put under house arrest. One of them was the manager of the Tripoli office of British Caledonian Airways. I don't think they exist anymore, but they did. There was British Caledonian Airways, and they used to do the flights between the UK and Tripoli. Then there were 2 men working for BT, because they had a contract out there, BT. And then there was another chap who lived in Dorset somewhere. His name was Malcolm something. I don't know quite what he was doing, but
so they were all kept under house arrest.
They were kept under house arrest.
What was your role?
I was nothing to do with it at that time. And Terry Waite went out before he got caught himself. This was long before he was taken into captivity. He went out to see Gaddafi and asked for Gaddafi to release these people. So Gaddafi said, "Okay, we do a swap." And Terry Waite said, "Oh, I can't do that." He said, "I don't work for the British government. I work for the Archbishop of Canterbury. I can't authorise your people to be released." So Gaddafi's attitude is, "What you come here for?" You know, I mean, that's what it's all about, doing a swap. Anyway, Terry Waite managed to persuade him to release these people, and there were pictures of Terry Waite and these 4 guys all smiling on the steps of an aircraft because they'd been released. And now Gaddafi waited and expected his guys to be released, and of course it didn't happen. And so he felt that Terry Waite had cheated him. And so he thought, right, I'll have another go. And that's when he went for me. And instead of just putting him under house arrest, he picked just 1 prisoner this time, but put the real heat on. And so I got all the real heat and got sentenced to death, and because they found me guilty of spying, and sentenced to death. And it was a ridiculous thing, because I had pointed out to them, look, they said, you have told your British government what you are doing here. I said, well, not me personally. I don't have the dealings with the British government, but my company has to do it, because you can't have a contract, because we have to get authorisation from our Ministry of Defence. If we don't get authorisation, we can't give you a contract.
How long were you kept in prison for?
I said 998 days all
so
told.
about 3 years?
Yeah, nearly 3 years.
What were conditions like?
Initially, I mean, it was dreadful. I was in a little cell, and there's no toilets or anything, no bedding. You're just lying on a concrete floor, no toilet. I mean, you have to excrete on the floor, and you're living with your own excreta. Eventually, I managed to get them to produce an old tin paint pot or something. Well, it was a big tin anyway, a big old rusty tin, and use that. But I mean, it's and you've got no washing facilities. You're absolutely stinking, and I mean, I must have smelt disgusting when they were interrogating me, but I suppose they're used to having their prisoners smelling pretty evil. And also, the blindfold that they put over your eyes, it's goggles. They put goggles over your eyes. And they've used them on other people. And I got conjunctivitis because, you know, you get lots of eye diseases in the Middle East, and they don't bother to clean them up. And so, I mean, I got very severe conjunctivitis, and simply because I was living in filth and I got filthy goggles on.
What keeps you going?
You're constantly working out what are they likely to ask me next time I get interrogated, and what am I going to say? How am I going to counter this, and how am I going to counter that? If you read Brian Keenan's book on his captivity, I mean, he comes out with some weird stories about how he had saved some candles, and he made a ring of candles and lit them up, and he was dancing naked around these candles. He's a weirdo. I mean, nothing like that. Didn't think anything like that. I mean, it wouldn't have even occurred to me. All I was thinking was, how am I going to get out of this mess, and what am I going to say to these bloody interrogators when they next start? What are they likely to ask me? What damn fool question?
Was there any contact with the outside world there?